What's up, you guys? Slim here with a new video today. We're here to bring you guys the next episode of how to beat this deck, and we are talking about True Draco Demise. You guys requested this deck next, as it is one of the main contenders in the meta. I've already covered Pendulum Magicians, and the last episode you guys saw was Mech Knight Invoked. It's interesting because some people say that that deck isn't meta. You must be sleeping under a rock, because if you haven't been paying attention to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, it is topping and even winning regionals left and right. So I think people need to do more research before they put such ignorant comments in the comments section. I never reply to them. I don't really have the time, but it's just like, you know, do your research before you, try to come and say something about the meta that you clearly don't know anything about. So anyways, when it comes to True Draco Demise, this deck really is a pain in the ass. I'm going to tell you, first and foremost, I took a very crushing defeat to one of the True Draco Demise decks at YCS Atlanta. It actually put me on tilt, which doesn't really happen that much, but it was so insane. I lost the die roll, got completely floodgated out, flipped anti-spell the minute I start my turn. I open with like 3 spells. It's just like, damn, I still played on. I didn't scoop. I played as much as I could. I refuse to really scoop a lot of games because you never know. You can come back pretty much at any time depending on what deck you have. Even when you're floodgated out, you just have to keep trying because there's always ways to get around floodgates, at least hopefully game 1. But this deck overall has been doing really well. You guys already know my boy Sam from Team Samurai came so close to topping YCS Atlanta. He got 34th place. Still so proud of you, bro. He played the deck. The deck is really insane, and I think what really added to the deck's power this format is the inclusion of the crazy little common that is Amano Iato, the big rock as people call it. That card is insane. It literally just says you can't do anything. You literally summon it into a pendulum board and then do your thing, break their board, and they just sit there scratching their head. I think that card is a huge factor as to why the deck is doing well. The deck has done well before, but with the hits to the deck, it's still fully functional, and the new inclusion of Amano Iato has made the deck even better. So we're going to talk about today, how do we beat the deck, and how do we, I'm going to break it down. Actually, there are 2 elements to beating this deck, and there are 2 attack plans you can have, and it's going after the monsters and going after the spell and traps, floodgates, etc. So we'll start with the monsters. Those of you guys know that with Dynamite gone, the main monsters, of course, Masterpiece, Maiden, and the 1 Ignis Heat. Those are your True Draco monsters. The average player will play 2 Masterpiece, 2 to 3 copies of Maiden, and of course the 1 Ignis, since it is at 1. I've seen some lists that do play 3 Maiden. It's just personal preference. Maiden searches your monsters, so it does have a lot of value. It combos really well with True Draco Apocalypse and True Draco Return of the True Dracos, whatever you want to call it, Return. Just because you're able to search Masterpiece, flip your trap, tribute the monster, tribute the trap, have a trap monster immune a Masterpiece. That's pretty hard to deal with. That's just the standard stuff. And Ignis searches your spells. A good going second card, and Masterpiece is Masterpiece. You guys already know. Those are the monsters. So the best way to counter those monsters, well, one of the biggest issues that True Draco suffer from is if they can't tribute. If they can't tribute summon, they are not able to play the game. So how do you get around that? Well, you can play floodgate cards like Mask of Restrict, one of the oldest cards that has been around in Yu-Gi-Oh for a while. It saw play again once Monarchs became a deck, once Clee Demise, once and once even True Draco saw. Once True Draco even saw competitive play, it was seen again because it's just one of the best answers. You flip it up and it's like, well, they can't even tribute. They have no way to tribute. It doesn't matter if they have their spells and traps. Unless they have a way to destroy them with Diagram, they're not tributing and getting around that floodgate. So that is just one way to actually out-floodgate the floodgate deck, so to speak. I feel that that's actually one of the best answers. However, that is a going first card, and it's not a main deck worthy card. It is a card that you'll have in the side deck. But I definitely wanted to start with Mask of Restrict because I feel it's one of the oldest but best options that you have kind of at your disposal as far as floodgating them out goes. There's that. There's also other ways to go about beating the monsters. The monsters themselves are not that strong. It's Masterpiece you have to deal with, let's be honest. You don't really worry about Ignis. You really don't worry about Maiden because you just have to be smart. The minute you activate something, it's gonna cause Maiden to trigger and search Masterpiece. Basically, at that point, you're running the chances my opponent have one of the 4 True Draco traps to flip into summon Masterpiece. Masterpiece during my turn. So basically you're kind of running the numbers on that. As far as the monsters go, you can just beat them simply by just running them over. If you have big monsters in your deck, depending on what deck you play, you just run them over. But Masterpiece is our real problem. So how do we get around Masterpiece? The answer is pretty simple. The answer has been there clear for a while, as many side decks will show, and that is Kaijus. Kaijus have been summoned so many times over Masterpiece, it's not even funny. Best one, obviously, is Gameciel, because Gameciel is the weakest, but giving your opponent a 2200 monster, taking away Masterpiece is huge. You can also decide if you're going to play that or Kumungus. Kumungus has seen an uprise in play due to the fact that a lot of decks are playing Mrs. Radiant, depending on what deck you play. I know 60 cards, we do play Mrs. Radiant. Invoked with our Scapegoat tokens, we do play Mrs. Radiant. The ability to add back Kumungus with Mrs. Radiant is quite important. That interaction alone has made it to where people are switching from Gameciel to Kumungus. Even though it is 200 attack points stronger, it does come up a lot more to where you can make Mrs. Radiant, Kumungus, and then crash, and then add Kumungus back. Like there's little interactions like that that actually make a huge difference in your side deck choices as far as the Kaijus go. I guess you could go as far to say, depending on if you're playing a machine deck, would you play Jizukuru? I'm not really sure. I'd say right now, the way the game is being played, that Kumungus and Gameciel are definitely the most played Kaijus right now. So that's one of the simplest ways, because you're just tributing over Masterpiece, getting it off the board. That's one of the main ways to deal with it, because Masterpiece really is a problem. Other ways to play around Masterpiece is simply that. You need to bait Masterpiece. Masterpiece's effect to pop a card is really annoying. Not only that, depending on what they tributed, if it's immune to monsters and traps, your spells are your best friends. Cards like Dark Hole, cards like Raigeki, even Slumber, etc., they are able to clear out Masterpiece. However, it just really comes down to how your opponent plays it. The standard Masterpiece is usually monster trap, but sometimes you will have a monster spell one. You'll rarely have a trap spell. I haven't seen that in a long time. Remember though, when they do a monster and trap, a monster and spell, they do lose their boost from diagram, so that's actually pretty important. But attacking the Masterpiece is like one of the main ways to beat the deck, because they can have all the floodgates in the world, but if they don't have Masterpiece as their main beater, or their monsters are all gone and they don't recycle them with their, was it the True Draco spell, whatever, I can't remember the name, but the one that shuffles back and is like a Daigusto Emerald. If they don't have that, then they're really running low on resources, so that's how you beat them. Another weakness to this deck is that they run a very low monster count, because they are playing Card of Demise. So being able to just take out Masterpiece and take out the other monsters gives you pretty much advantage over them, and they have a hard time recovering if their monsters don't come back and you've wiped out all their floodgates. So that's pretty much the monsters. As far as the Mono Iato goes, you guys, I mean, they just summon that thing. There's nothing you can do. Like, I've played against that card multiple times now, and I'll be honest, like, that monster is there to just break your board. That monster is there. They're going to summon it going second, break your board, and then it's either going to bounce back to hand, or they're going to use it for the tribute as the monster part of Masterpiece or one of their guys. So dealing with the Mono Iato, it's not really going to happen, so I'm not really going to talk about that. Like I said, I think the card is just insane, though. It added a whole new level of Floodgate, and just you can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! To that deck. So a Mono Iato is something you will see, so just prepare for it. Unfortunately, though, like I said, there's not a lot of things you can do unless you're playing traps or whatever that can stop the summon of it. But, I mean, you can't even use monster effects, so your hand traps become useless. So that's pretty much the monster breakdown. None of their spells. Their spells, of course, they have Heritage. Their main draw card, they have their diagrams, their terraformings, all that stuff. It's just that the ability to have those extra tribute summons, they're able to summon like 3 times a turn. It's insane. Main thing is diagram is their whole, just how they get a lot of advantage. They pop their cards, they search. Heritage, gets them their draws, etc., etc. So the main thing about that is that diagram is basically what you want to attack. You want to attack diagram. Now, what's the best way of attacking diagram when they're activating it? It's your hand traps, you guys. Ash and Ogre, those are your best options. Valor does absolutely nothing to that deck. I'm sorry, Valor sucks against that deck. Take it from me, I've been playing a couple decks where I've been testing Valor. The main deck went up against True Draco, and I just looked at it in my hand. It sucks. So Valor, not a good card. Ogre, amazing. Ogre gets diagram off the board. It doesn't resolve. Ash, not as good, but it does stop the diagram for the turn, so you buy yourself another turn. So those are your best options as far as hand traps go against diagram. And then some of the most generic stuff, now that we've already talked about the monsters. How do you beat Backrow? Well, Backrow removal is quite simple, you guys. Twin Twister is probably your best friend, as well as Cosmic Cyclone, and as far as to go as Mystical Space Typhoon. I feel that Twin Twister is the superior card. It does take out 2 cards. That's really, really good. However, some decks may not be able to support that. The discard can actually be critical depending on what deck you play. Since I do play a graveyard-reliant deck, like 60 cards, I do prefer Twin Twister, because going second, if they go first, set up their stuff, try to floodgate you, you are able to Twin Twister and, just crack 2 of their cards before even doing anything. And without any cards on the field, they can't even get any value out of their heritage, out of their traps, out of anything. They're not able to pop any of your guys. So that's actually pretty important. I think that Twin Twister is definitely one of the best options. However, if your deck cannot support it, then you definitely have the option of Cosmic Cyclone and Mystical Space Typhoon. The deck, unfortunately, is starting to main deck Anti-Spell, because it's like one of the best floodgates against Pendulum. So a lot of times drawing Twin Twister, drawing Cosmic Cyclone, you have to use it directly on that Anti-Spell fragrance, which sucks. But I mean, it's either do that or you really can't play for a whole nother turn. So that's one thing to take into account. That's how I lost, is like I told you, got a Masterpiece plus a flipped up Anti-Spell and a bunch of like floodgates. Just like, yeah, you're not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's just something to take into account, is that Anti-Spell fragrance is most likely in the main deck, so watch out for that. Other things is, outside of their spell and traps, their extra tribute summons, you have to prepare, unfortunately, for the floodgates, and there are a crap ton of them. There is Skill Drain, there is the Monarch Erupts, there is Anti-Spell Fragrance, there is possibly even Imperial Order. There are so many just powerful cards that they can play because of the type of deck they are, that you really have to prepare for them. The best thing I can say is that this same exact approach is being able to just pop the Backrow with Backrow removal. When they play cards like Imperial Order, though, unfortunately, I mean, there's not much you can do. That card just comes out of nowhere, and it's just like, well, can't really do anything. And they can just tribute it off whenever they want. The one advantage this deck really has is it really utilizes floodgates like no other deck. Being able to tribute Anti-Spell or tribute Imperial Order for Masterpiece or for any of your guys is pretty insane. So that's just another thing to take into account. I'm sure you guys are already familiar with that. They can't play the best floodgates. Cards like Skill Drain and Monarch Erupt, again, say you can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! However, you have to look at it like this. If they don't get their engine rolling and all they are floodgates, all you have to do is just kind of beat down and get through the floodgates if you are playing Backrow removal, like I mentioned earlier. So the deck is not without its flaws. I know it sounds like the deck is unbeatable, but that's definitely not true. It has not won a YCS, so it's clear to show, and it has topped multiple times, but it never really gets past, I think, what was it? I think it got top 4 in Bochum or something like that, but I mean, it couldn't win. So the deck is not without its flaws, just like every other deck in the game. So don't think all these floodgates are going to be, the be-all, end-all against this deck, but it's definitely something that you need to take into account, just how we directly attack all the Backrow as well as the monsters, because I think the floodgates are really what will get to the opponent besides the Masterpiece. It's just the floodgates, it's like you literally can't play. So getting around Skill Drain, getting around all that, that's why Twin Twisters and any effects that can activate, like by banishing like Shiranui Spirit Master or just anything that can pop Backrow or do anything like that without, anything on the board to where you can't get Skill Drained or whatever is amazing. So that's just another thing to take into account. And like I said, playing around Masterpiece. Now, I think the last part I'll talk about is what makes the deck so consistent and so good. Well, they play Card of Demise, they play Pot of Duality, they play possibly Upstart, and they play Pot of Desires. They play all the possible draw cards in the game. Best answer to those cards really is Ash Blossom, you guys. Ashing the Demise is huge. Ashing the Desires is huge. Really ashing the Demise, because most of the time they're going to just set everything and then Demise with no cards in hand. So if you can ash the Demise, you can get, you at least have a chance, because then they're not able to continue playing. Now, granted, Pot of Duality is a hell of a card. Pot of Desires is a hell of a card. And, I mean, you're never going to ash Duality unless that's all they have. If they're top decking and they Duality, well, I mean, your main cards you're going after are definitely Desires and Demise, so keep that into account. They are very consistent with their draw cards, but again, if they don't see enough monsters or they see too many monsters, that can be their downfall. So take that into account, because the deck is not without its flaws, like I already mentioned. But that's pretty much all I've got for how we really beat this deck. I feel that it's definitely a deck you guys need to look out for. I feel it's one of the most represented decks decks in the game right now. Not the most represented, but it's definitely getting up there in numbers. I feel that the ability to play that deck, not play an extra deck, is appealing to a lot of players, because you guys should know with Monarchs Erupt, you can't play an extra deck. So one thing I'll advise to you is always ask your opponent how many cards in extra deck. That is a legal thing you can do, and definitely something you should do, because if they say 0, you can pretty much guess that they are playing True Draco Demise, and there is Monarch Erupt in that deck, so that can change your strategy when playing your deck. And I hope that that information is helpful, because it definitely is helpful for me when I'm at events, and I'll ask my opponent how many cards in extra deck, because they always ask how many cards in deck. They'll see the brick, and I'm like 60, and it just be like, how many cards in your deck? They'll say 40. I'm like, oh, you playing an extra deck? And then I'll get a yes or a no. If I get a yes, it's like, well, okay, maybe they're not playing Monarch Erupt. So it's definitely something to take into account. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Just tried to give you as much information as possible. Again, I don't hit every card. I'm sure there's plenty of things that I forgot, but I think you guys will definitely be able to fill that in the comments. So down below, mention any ways that you go against True Draco. What's your best answer to this deck? Do you feel that the deck is absolutely insane with all the floodgates? I really do. I don't think it's the best deck, but I feel it's definitely getting up there as one of the most represented and one of the scariest decks in the format, because when you get floodgated to hell, it's really hard to play Yu-Gi-Oh, but I mean, you play out as best as you can. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. If you did, be sure to smash that like button. Let me know another deck you'd like to see featured here on how to beat this deck. We're definitely going to just cover more of the meta as it shapes up, and remember that when new sets come out, new decks will evolve, and then we'll be adding more episodes to this series. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.